Why audit public finances? Why look at why do we need to have accountability around how government generates and on what these revenues are spent? Apart from a lot of it actually being taxpayers' money or money generated through other means, for example, for certain fees, for example, on private sector activities, on mining activities, in Namibia is quite big, and so forth. Auditing of public finances provides a good financial yardstick to the performance of the public sector. And maybe here we can especially think about about a lot of the SOEs that are often in our news, which often have very dismal finance situation. And then of course there is a pretty clear understanding that very often something is very wrong at these SOEs in terms of management, in terms of performance. Are they actually doing what their mandate tells them to do, and so forth? And since this is all money that comes somewhere from the private purse, from taxpayers, from businesses, and so forth, we are all somehow affected by it. Because of course, if an SOE performs badly, then that affects us badly as citizens and as residents of this country. So this is why it's important to actually have a good understanding to do audits about what's happening with the money in the public sector. Notice we're only talking about the public sector, so not private sector. That has different requirements, and obviously we shouldn't be too. Normal citizens don't need to be that concerned about private sector because that money usually comes from somewhere else and not necessarily taxpayer money. So in theory, these audits should lead to define actions and changes to address audit concerns. So many audits, if you go through them, they have audit recommendations and say, often very dry, but with managers, they can all be prosecuted. That's sort of called corporate governance, if you will. I'm not going to go into that. Government has something similar as well. Now, globally, I need to keep an eye on the clock. Globally, very often public audits don't really result in any tangible actions. And this is a global issue. And this notably doesn't just affect poorer or lower middle income countries, but this also affects big countries like the US, like Germany, like the UK, France, you name it. This is an issue for a lot of countries. And a lot of taxpayers and citizens are often very unhappy how their money is spent, or in terms of what is actually accounted, so where they can actually find out what their taxpayer money has been spent on. And then if there's an issue, if there's actually been taken, be it by Parliament, be it by the board that is appointed to an SOE, be it by the minister, be it by the executive, and so forth. So, and this is something basically that the study at the school wants to look at, and wants to look at how can this be improved? What are sort of international guidelines out there? What of those things could potentially work here? So there are basically two big components to the study. I'm briefly going to look at fiscal transparency. So for those that are not quite familiar with this, which apparently according to a lot of informants, there is a lot of. In Namibia, we have quite an issue. A lot of people have no idea about these things. We even have some responses in our service saying, who is the Auditor General? A lot of them did know, but a lot of them don't know, or some of them didn't know, which obviously raises a serious question. So, and then we talk about sort of fiscal transparency and accountability. Transparency, of course, refers to, do we have the audits? Do we have the books? Are they published? Are they easily accessible on a website? Can the normal person on the street actually go and look at them? And to some extent, a lot of people also argue transparency should also mean that these documents are easily understood, which is often an issue, especially for audits. And some people, some informants have actually also told me that they don't really feel that a lot of them MPs, our parliamentarians, really understand what actually is written in a lot of these audits. Food for thought. Accountability is, of course, then what happens to those audit recommendations. Do people actually stand up, let's say the management of an SOE, and say, yes, we acknowledge some of these issues, and yes, we're doing ABCD to address this, or even that the executive takes drastic steps and says, you know, we're wrapping up in Namibia because you're just not financially viable and there's been too much mismanagement. That's an extreme version. Some people would like to see more of it, others maybe not. That's up to the debate. Right. I mentioned that audits need to be publicly accessible, and in most countries there is an established institution who does public audits, which is in general referred to as the Supreme Audit Institutions, so SAIS. SAIS should be factual, impartial, and objective. This is very, very important because as an accountant, you shouldn't at all be involved in any sort of management. You can't, because if you start managing or giving concrete advice on how an organization should be managed and actually take decisions, then you are vested in that organization and then you lose your objectivity. I don't know if everybody's clear on this, but this is very crucial. A lot of people do not seem to understand this. Even some people in the bookkeeping industry we spoke to didn't seem to be quite understanding that international it is seen as actually critical. You have to be impartial. You cannot, you know, as an accountant, you cannot have business interests in an organization that you audit. Because of course you'll be biased. You want to cook the books because you want them to make it look good. Again, something I would like to stress. And many sites are governed and guided by international, so the International Institute for Supreme Audit Organizations. I'm sure I got that wrong, but anyway, InterSci. And InterSci has produced various accounting standards. They differ a bit from what is out there for private sector, but they're sort of seen as really, if you will, the gold standard and the kind of umbrella body for almost every Supreme Audit institution. I know the Office of the Auditor General, OAG. Okay, another section besides fiscal transparency is that we wanted to look at public participation. So this is recognized as the one of 5 pillars of being crucial to good governance. Why is this so? Why should, you know, we already elect our decision makers in national elections, so why should we now have regular consultations or engagements with citizens and decision makers? So it's recognized that these days, you know, elections are not good enough anymore. Seen by many people not good enough anymore. People want to engage, they want to have a say. And this is quite important. So in these public participation, ideally, should not just be consultations. A lot of times in this country, you think if government speaks to 2-3 people, that is public participation, and we tick the box, and that's good enough. It's not good enough. On an international standard, and for a lot of academics, it's not seen as good enough. You have to go far, far deeper. But I also have to say, this is a contentious topic. There's lots of arguments about this internationally. You can look at the report, there's more explanatory in there. But in general, in Namibia, it's being applied, but there are a lot of questions around how it's being applied. We can just look at some of the issues around, you know, how Recon Africa and government has handled that whole oil exploration issues. And a lot of citizens and participants have actually been very upset and said, you know, that whole public participation part of that project was a smokescreen and was dishonest and it's not acceptable. So that's always a big danger when you do public participation and the government private sector doesn't do it properly or doesn't seem to be genuinely interested in this type of process. Just very quickly, so public participation is also pushed these days in the last 10 or so years to audit institutions saying, if you want to be more relevant in governance, if you want your audits to be taken more serious by citizens and parliament, then one avenue is to have more public participation. Again, for accountants, this is maybe a bit ooh, because we want to be impartial, we want to be objective, we don't want to be involved with the public. Nevertheless, InterSci and a number of auditors, a number of SIs have said, fine, we take this, we need to do this, this is important, we need to be more engaged. So this is recognized, but it's happening very, very slow. but it's seen as one way of really improving the work of SAIS. So we've done various components of the study. You can again look at the paper for more details. We've done a broad survey with a number of stakeholders. We've done a lot of detailed interviews with MPs, both from the opposition as well from the ruling party. We've done, interviews with accountants, with chartered accountants, with media representatives, with analysts, a few civil society people, and this is sort of what comes out of it. We asked two things. We asked primarily about issues around fiscal transparency and how they could be addressed in this country. And secondly, if people felt that public participation was something that is needed and would maybe give value to the whole fiscal fiscal management, if this was something that Namibia should pursue more actively. There were a lot of back and forth, but a broad consensus was across almost everybody was, the current status, the inefficiency in our auditing, the poor action of our parliament to engage with these documents, and then of course the non-compliance by a lot of organizations that are audited, regional councils, municipalities, SOEs. I'm sure you guys can think of 20 examples on the top of your head. I don't need to spell this out. But recommendations are often simply not taken seriously, and there's very little. Board members don't really get prosecuted or fined. This doesn't happen, unfortunately. So, to cut it short, people don't like this and think this undermines government, and we really need to do something. And I need to hurry up a bit. But there's also great demand among stakeholders, especially in the survey and media, who said, there needs to, and also there needs to be more education on what is the OAG really doing? Why is it important for us as citizens to really be engaged in this? Then again, a point I already made, number 3. Number 4 was quite interesting. A lot of people also said, we need to have stronger laws in place so the Auditor General, whoever is responsible, can enforce compliance with audit recommendations. Again, this is tricky. If you give it to the auditor shouldn't be managing internal affairs of an organization. So there's a bit of a debate. People weren't quite clear where these legal powers should be situated. Nevertheless, most people said we need more powers so there can be more enforcement. For me personally, what I found a bit concerning was that a lot of informants wanted to speak about corruption. There's a small section in the paper you can actually look at, which, we sort of wanted to look at, but it wasn't the main focus of the study at all. But a lot of people were like, let's talk about corruption, and we were, no, we want to talk about fiscal management and public participation. For me, this shows a sign that there is something seriously wrong, and at least in terms of perception, because if so many people immediately jump to the concern about corruption, what does this say about our general perception around public finances? So I leave that with you. The other issue we had, many people didn't really want to talk to us because maybe the subject was sensitive, or they all felt we were going to talk about corruption, which we didn't want. I'll leave you with that. There are some positive things. It's not all negative, and we do have to acknowledge the positive as well. The OAG is well established. We can argue about funding, but it's well established. It has a strong legal mandate, although it's not seen strictly as independent by the Open Budget Index. Again, something to think about, but overall, the basis is there. There's an established norm of engaging with stakeholders, both public and private sector, especially in our environmental laws. This is very clear. If you want to build a factory or whatever, you have to engage with affected citizens, organizations, and so forth. And this has to be documented. And this often happens. How effective it is, we don't know. Regulators are often aware of the deficits. There are huge issues in terms of capacity and administration in the whole public accounting profession, and they are trying to address this. So this is positive. The Ministry of Finance and the OAG themselves have voiced the support for looking towards maybe seeing how public or stakeholder engagement perhaps can be more streamlined into their operations. Also positive. There's also a lot of interest from media and other financial services, for example, to be more consulted about financial matters, which I think also is important because, of course, the average citizen would sometimes struggle in these public participations to really understand the issues. So this is something which maybe can look at for people who might have a better understanding and offer concrete advice or input for these consultations. I'm almost done. Maybe very briefly, some of the selected recommendations. So, of course, we strongly feel the study strongly argues for having more public participation. We do understand that this is tricky, especially for the Auditor General who might not have that much capacity or understanding of how this is done. There are various support mechanisms, and you don't have to do right away a sort of broad public consultation and broadcasting. You can have a smaller stakeholder meeting, you can have a survey with the public that gives you more control of how it's managed. So there are a lot of ways and means how this public participation can take place without overstretching the resources of the Auditor General. So another thing is that it is really important that there is more proactive communication. The OAG has a very good website, I think, from government. If you look at other government websites, a lot of the document audits you can find. This is positive, but at the same stage, you hear very little from our parliament committees who are supposed to engage with this. You hardly see, actually you see no documentation on the public accounts website of our parliament. There's zilch, no summary, no nothing. They have a nice website funded by a donor. I don't know how difficult it can be just scanning and putting up some tool for educating the public. Regulators should also look at strengthening and revisiting and strengthening the legislation that looks at public fiscal management. We talked about this. And then finally, the other concern, and this goes a bit beyond our discussion and beyond other things. So I don't know if some of you read the weekend, I'm almost done. So there was a very interesting business of show by a lady called Anna Ambunda. I hope I get the name right. This is very recent, this is from last week. This lady usually writes about the fashion industry and the entertainment industry and has some good tips and obviously is clearly quite well understanding. And she talks about something completely different here. She talks about the recent heist that happened of money. One of our security companies, men stole our money. Why would I, as an average citizen, help the police catch a man who has stolen money when that is the culture that has been cultivated in our country? And she goes on, we are constantly bombarded with stories of state resources being squandered without a care in the world, and we rarely see any justice being served. This goes back to this final point I want to make. There are indications that there's a lot of distrust in government institutions that has sort of developed over the past year. Also in our elected representatives, if you look at Afrobarometer statistics, a lot of people feel that their local council doesn't really give a damn about them and doesn't really care about their opinions. There's an issue about transparency, accountability. As I said, we struggle to get MPs to talk to us about these issues. And for me, I think this is a huge concern because, I mean, this young lady is talking about this. If people don't trust government and trust that government will do the right thing with their taxpayers' money, why should we be honest about tax? Why should we pay fuel levies? Why should we pay our TV licenses? So these issues really come to the fore, and I think we need to be addressed. So thank you very much.
Good morning.
Morning.
Thank you, IPPR, for inviting me to speak at the launch of your book on fiscal transparency in Namibia, Keep Your Eyes on the Money. I want to congratulate the IPPR team. It's good to see several of you here who've been working on this. But I want to congratulate you for completing this important project that highlights the role the public can play in improving budget transparency accountability. Also, thanks to the Office of the Auditor General and other stakeholders for your engagement and efforts to increase fiscal transparency in Namibia. And I'm so pleased that the media is here too, because obviously the media plays a very profound role in transparency of every sort and accountability. So thanks for being here as well. The United States is proud to have supported this project. And we didn't support it out of some arrogant or false belief that we have resolved fiscal transparency issues in the United States. Lack of transparency presents a clear threat to democracy and rule of law around the world. President Biden and Secretary Blinken continue to emphasize that in both our domestic and our foreign policy, we must do everything we can to partner with democracies to ensure accountable government. And obviously a key piece of that is financial transparency. Throughout my career in the Foreign Service, as I moved around the world, in different countries around the world, including my own, I've seen that lack of fiscal transparency is a breeding ground for corruption, whether in the public or private sector. And it's an exercise that all democracies must continuously undertake to stay healthy and accountable to their citizens. A few benefits of fiscal transparency that I see is that citizens are better able to hold their leadership accountable because they have more insight into the budget. It helps build market confidence and supports economic sustainability. Countries committed to fiscal transparency enjoy better access to domestic and international credit markets. They also attract investors and are less likely to have destabilizing debt and corrupt practices. Inclusion and transparency on fiscal matters creates public confidence in the government that Dietrich talked about at length, and it shines light on opaque processes, eliminating opportunities for poor administration of public revenues or corruption. And fiscal transparency creates more inclusive governance by enabling citizens to participate through accessing information and influencing the way the government handles finances. So it really strengthens democracy. Conversely, the consequences of weak fiscal transparency are serious. It can enable corruption and misappropriation of public funds, erode public trust in the government, and eventually contribute to cultural tolerance that you just described from the newspaper, which allows for dishonesty under the excuse that everyone is doing it. Every year, the United States produces a fiscal transparency report covering the performance of different governments around the world on fiscal transparency. Namibia consistently makes the list of countries that are meeting basic fiscal transparency standards. And we applaud that, obviously. But we also want to caution that just like in the United States, there is room for improvement. Established democracies like Namibia and the United States, we can't rest on our laurels. We must constantly push ahead to ensure greater transparency and fewer footholds for poor uses of public resources or corruption. ITPR's Keep Your Eyes on the Money addresses the importance of building strong public participation to increase fiscal transparency and accountability for government finances. I think one of the best things about this report is that it outlines some concrete recommendations that Namibia can take to increase fiscal transparency and improve public trust in the government handling of revenues. I was going to walk through some of the recommendations, but since you just did that, I just want to say that I acknowledge that ultimately it's up to the citizens of Namibia, the media, the government, civil society, etc. here to ensure the implementation of these recommendations. I do offer the United States government's continued partnership with Namibia as we both work to strengthen and defend the democratic traditions and institutions that both of our countries fought hard to create. Thank you again for this opportunity to join you today, and thanks for your continued work on this very important topic.
Is the judge the affairs of the USA, Madam Jessica Long, senior official, members of the media, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Master of Ceremonies, for giving me the opportunity to say some comments to the report as launched while representing the Office of the Auditor General, OAG, that is, government auditors, The report is drafted following the study by IPPR is well received.
Increasing fiscal transparency is a challenge for all governments, regardless of their size.
All we agree to the content of the study and the text is emanated. And the emphasis, of course, there's quite emphasis on the mandate and status of the OEG as the supreme audit institution in the country. And of course, there are quite room for improvement, as we can all agree. Just to commit to some, the OEG adopted the standards, international standards for supreme audit institutions. The OEG, of course, adopted the international the standards for supreme audit institutions way already back in 2010. And of course, one of the key standards is the ESI 12. That already sets the tone for the aspect of criticality, how critical it is for citizens of a given country to be able to hold representatives accountable. So the OAG, through execution of its mandate, have to ensure that accountability, transparency is forthcoming, and that is continuously happening. As with the ESI in mind, we agree that the IPPR's report is launched in that stakeholder engagement opportunities is in Namibia as stated, and the oversight function is still limited. Yeah? So there's definitely room for improvement. The OEG definitely values the public's views and opinions, and currently the office is in the process of crafting its 5-year strategic plan, and in that we'll surely make sure that we have prioritized the demand among stakeholders for more in-depth engagement opportunities. So we really have to work on that. In terms of the mandate, the legal mandate, of course, as stated by IPPR, the OEG has that sufficient broad mandate in terms of execution of the audit. So currently the AG has that prerogative to set the scope of the audit, any audit it deemed necessary. The extent can be set by us, by the Auditor General. However, the only aspect from an independence perspective as stated is that of administrative and financial autonomy. So the audit bill, of course, as we all know, we're waiting for the enactment thereof. That would give the OAG that the much needed independence. So of course the independence for the audit is in order, but for administrative, in order to secure resources needed to do more, that is quite currently still awaited. So the OAG execute its mandate adequately whilst enhancing transparency, accountability, and the OAG would need to further improve its efforts in fiscal matters by way of introduction as well as the broadened public utilized methods, such as you said, be more closer to the public, bring the service, so to say, closer to the public, consult more. So currently, to date, the main focus of this office, the OAG, is with audit clients, just to identify and address areas for improvement along the lines of the audit process, and work on the communication between these two parties, the OAG and auditees. Currently, the OAG's representatives are in the south, having consultations with audit clients there, specifically local authority as we speak. That is the municipalities and councils in the Karas and Hardap region. So of course, that needs to be worked on to bring the consultation to another level. The survey, we have, as the study mentioned, if you read the summary, some best practices for size is to embark on, in-depth surveys. So currently, there's an external survey that is run online, and this can be accessed through appreciated. So we should congratulate as well the IPPR for this successful study. Invite you as members of the media, members of public, to participate in that. Give us your feedback. Mainly, the objective of this survey is to assess the level of stakeholder satisfaction of the office's core function, while enhancing the knowledge of the OAG's mandate. Of course, as from onset, there's already that visibility of AG and the Attorney General, the Auditor General's line is being crossed. So there's a lot that we need to do just to raise awareness in itself. So that survey will ask again, do you know the mandate, and also get input from the public. And yeah, so of course, to maintain independence, more public participation needs to be done. What we see, the study is hinting to the UN and inter-size approaches that is available. Of course, this office follows the e-size and the methodology from inter-size. So of course, we have to venture into the approaches, and we are open for that. And of course, this public engagement and input would be more on the planning level of the audit, as you could imagine. So, of course, to follow these ESI standards, we would have to involve the public more in terms of, which areas in government we need to focus on. So that would be more in the planning stage. However, to attain and maintain our independence as per required by the ESIs would be for us then to go back and do a test job and assess, efficiency, effectiveness, compliance, of course, to financial reporting frameworks, but also to legal legislation that governs the different institutions. So more in the planning stage, that's what we foresee. And it might be challenging, but we can venture into considering the rest of the audit process. So yeah, in conclusion, the OAG fully agrees and supports the recommendations as per our report. Recommendation 2 calls for us as OAG specifically, along with Ministry of Finance and the public and Parliament, to really pull up in terms of fiscal management and oversight. So yes, we'll really consider these recommendations, and the OAG would utilize its available resources and pledge to be more proactive in communicating and raising awareness amongst the broader public. And the OAG would really, venture into us being more in the public sphere, because currently we, as auditors, we don't talk a lot. We are not visible. The media would attest to that. But of course, and we don't want to make promises. I'm sure I don't have the mandate to make promises. I'm acting just in the capacity as a representative. But we are positive to the outcome of the study, and we look forward to working with the relevant institutions. So thank you. That's all for now.